Hi everyone, this is Tyson Lemuel with Davey Resource Group. We're going to get started here in a minute with our Stormwater Management webinar, but I just usually like to give everyone a couple minutes to log on, get settled, and then we'll get started. So hang tight and we'll get started in a couple minutes. All right, people are still pouring in, but I think it's time to get started. Again, my name is Tyson Lemuel. I'm a business developer with Davey Resource Group, and I'm in the Kent, Ohio office. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We're excited about 2020. We're excited to kick things off here with another eco webinar. And we thought we'd start things off this year with some baseline information, stormwater management, understanding compliance, and then later on in the webinar, we'll go into some more detailed information about green infrastructure practices. So I've asked Becca Berry and Dave Gamstetter to join me today. And Becca's going to handle the stormwater management presentation. And while I'm getting things set up here, I'm going to ask a poll question, just asking you which type of organization you're joining us from, just to give us an idea of what our audience is. So, okay. So Becca is a senior project manager with Davey Resource Group. She's been with the company for about 4 years, and she's one of our team leaders for our regulatory affairs service line. And Becca and I have been working together for about a year, and I thought it'd be nice to invite her here today. Dave actually made the drive up from Cincinnati. He's in Cincinnati. I'll give you more of an introduction to him later. But it was nice. Dave came up last night, went out to dinner, so we could be a little more familiar with each other to do this discussion today. You want to go to the next slide? Just so you know who your presenters are, Becca and Dave. Okay, go to the next slide. And I think we'll just jump right in and get things started with Becca's presentation.
Thanks, Tyson. As Tyson said, I'm Becca. I'm out of the Kent, Ohio office also. I work a lot with stormwater compliance and helping keep clients compliant. So today I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what stormwater is, how it's regulated, and we're going to take a look at some construction best management practices, and then also take a look at some post-construction best management practices that are more common. And we're going to talk about annual inspections and the importance of those inspections.
So far, most of our audience looks like they're from government agencies at the moment.
Okay, so, all right, great.
Just so you know.
Yeah. So what is stormwater? Stormwater is water that comes from precipitation, and the natural landscape before it's developed intercepts and absorbs most water that comes from precipitation, But what isn't absorbed by that landscape that leaves is called runoff, and that is what we actually gets regulated. So as we increase impervious surface by developing natural areas, we increase the stormwater runoff. And we realized that that stormwater runoff is heavily polluted, and that there needed to be some kind of regulation to take care of that runoff and mitigate for the increased runoff as areas are developed.
Okay. Give me a second here, Becca.
Sure.
I guess viewers are having trouble viewing the screen.
Oh, okay. You want to take a look at what
Let me see if we can fix this.
Yeah. Take a look at what maybe it looks like.
Let me see your dash real quick. Let me see for a second.
Sure. Oh, that.
Oh, go ahead and click on that.
Probably.
Maybe try that. Yeah, go there.
Click here.
Yeah, see if that works. Okay, let me look at my screen real quick.
I'm going to click back to that. Oh, okay, here we go. Show my screen. Okay.
See if that, okay. That looks like it's gonna work.
I think so. Let's see.
All right, looks like we're back up here, or we're working for the first time, I guess.
Yes.
All right, let's get back on track here.
Let's go take a step back just so that you guys can
Yeah, so
see
everyone can see where we
the
started.
first slides here, just so you have an idea of who we are.
Okay.
How to minimize that? I'll like hide it over here, I think.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Cool. Okay.
All right, so we'll fast forward back into Becca's presentation.
Sure. And these were just pictures of Dave and I, so you have an idea of what we look like and who the presenters are. And I'll bring back up my overview slide. Let me go to the stormwater slide so you guys can see that. So we were talking about what stormwater is and how stormwater runoff is increased by the increase of impervious surfaces. So as we develop the natural landscape, we're increasing impervious surface and increasing stormwater runoff. So we realized that we needed to regulate this runoff and figure out how to treat it so that less pollutants are making their ways into the waterways. So how is it regulated? We have regulations under the Clean Water Act. In 1987, there were amendments to the Clean Water Act that actually introduced stormwater. And those regulations mostly revolve around the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. When the acronym for that is NPDES. When that first launched, they were looking at point source contamination. So mainly just industrial sites that were directly dumping into waterways. Later on, there were further amendments that determined we needed to look at non-point source places of pollution. So that included stormwater runoff and where that water was picking up excessive pollution that was entering the waterways. That's mostly regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. In some states like Ohio, it's regulated by the Ohio or the state EPA. And then after construction is complete and 70% vegetation is reached, the developer or the property owner is released from that permit, and they tend to have post-construction best management practices. Those are regulated often by counties and cities under land management agreements where the property owner has assumed responsibility for managing and maintaining the stormwater facility or BMP. Construction BMPs, or best management practices, are implemented to reduce erosion and sedimentation that leaves construction sites. This picture on the right is a stream crossing by a utility company, and they're using filter stock and temporary stabilization to prevent erosion and excessive sedimentation into that stream where they've crossed with their line underground. These types of best management practices require weekly inspection. So every 7 days, there should be an environmental inspector that goes on site to ensure that they're functioning properly. They don't need to be changed or modified to meet the site conditions. And they also need to be inspected after 3/4 inch rainfall within 24 hours. So those inspectors are monitoring those rainfall events and keeping track of when they need to go back on site. Often when you have that amount of rainfall, the BMPs might fail, or they might need cleaned because they're clogged with sediment and debris. The main goal of construction best management practices is to prevent the sediment-laden water from leaving the site. So you want to treat it on site, and any water that may leave is cleaner water. These are just some examples of construction BMPs. On the top right side, we have inlet protection. So the filter sock is wrapped around the grate inlet to allow ponding around that inlet. And the theory is that the sediment drops out of the water before the water flows past. I think now you guys can actually see that slide. I was a little bit fast. So top right hand side is inlet protection, and the water will pond around the blue filter sock and let sediment drop out before water drains in. On the bottom right side, we have a what's called a dandy bag inside a grate inlet. And so as water flows into that grate inlet, the dandy bag is on the inside catching sediment and debris before it can enter the storm sewer. In this case, that BMP should have been removed, but they hadn't removed it from the site yet, but they had reached the 70% vegetation, as you can see in the picture. And on the left side of the slide, we have a sediment basin. So this area is being developed into a subdivision, and the runoff runs into the sediment basin. And the purpose is kind of the same as the ponding. For the inlet protection, the sediment drops out before the water flows through the rest of the system. Go ahead and click through. And so maintenance or inspections are important with these construction BMPs because they will fail if you leave them to their own devices in at sites. This is inlet protection that was around a grate inlet, and there's a filter sock check dam just before the inlet that also failed. The water has scoured underneath the filter sock and out and around all the inlet protection, and in this case is draining directly to a sediment basin that is below the inlet. So anything carrying sediment is going to come right into that grate inlet, and then the erosion is just going to continue to expose that catch basin and deteriorate the side slopes of the sediment basin.
Almost looks like a landslide.
Yeah, yeah. It had been not touched for quite a while. Now we're going to talk a little bit about post-construction best management practices. So these are after 70% vegetation is really reached and the site is released from their permit. If they had features that were going to be converted to post-construction BMPs, like this is a sediment basin, would have been a sediment basin during construction and then gets converted to a, in this case, a wet basin for post-construction. They're permanent features, so they're always going to stay on that developed site. They're always going to require inspections and maintenance to ensure that they're functioning properly. And that's going to be based on that management agreement that the property owner has with the city or county. In some instances, there is no agreement, but almost all of them now have agreements where the owner is taking responsibility for that feature. In some cases, it is a biannual inspection, so we go like spring and fall and look at all the features on site. I'll have to excuse the
Never mind the train.
Yeah, we're right next to the train tracks here in Kent, so I apologize. I'll give it just a sec to go through. Okay, I think it's far enough now that you guys should still be able to hear me. So these features are developed for long-term stormwater treatment. They go in, they stay in. In some cases, they need modifications because after a while they fail in certain areas, like the side slopes might fail, or there might be excessive scouring around inlets and outlets that need to be adjusted with some riprap rock or things like that. But for the long term, sure. But they're meant for long-term stormwater treatment. Where's that coming from? Okay. Okay. We had a little bit of technical difficulty there. Sorry about that. Post-construction BMPs, this is an example of a wet basin. So it maintains a permanent pool of water. It does require routine maintenance to maintain functionality. And what we usually look at is the pool itself. Does it have invasive vegetation or nuisance animal problems? The side slopes, are they experiencing erosion in any areas? Are woody species encroaching on the side slopes or the embankment? Is the overflow overrun with vegetation, or does it still look how it was supposed to be when it was installed? So there's some common things that we look for during the inspection. And with these basins and the dry basins, it's best to have your inspections done and address those small maintenance issues, because with stormwater basins, those small issues can become large issues very quickly, and they don't go away if you try to forget about them. So it's always best to take care of them when they're small. Another post-construction BMP is a dry basin. Typically, they're grassed or mulched. They're meant to drain down within 24 to 48 hours after rainfall, and they have similar maintenance requirements as wet basins. This photo here is of a dry basin that has become taken over with Phragmites and invasive cattail. So our recommendation would be to address the invasive species and then reseed the bottom of the basin so that it can continue to function properly and address the same water quality volume. So that's the amount of water that it's meant to treat from runoff from the facility. And lastly, we have bioretention cells. So they have similar maintenance to basins, and they're shaped in some ways. The grassed ones are shaped similarly. They have a little bit different outlet structure usually, and they usually outlet directly into storm sewers. And they're adequate for smaller developments that have limited space. So you might not be able to install a large basin, but you can install a few bioretention cells in different areas of the site to treat the same amount of runoff. Some main maintenance issues with these is to maintain the vegetation, whether it's planted vegetation, as in the bottom photograph, or to maintain that grassed vegetation in the top photograph on this slide. And they do face similar erosion issues and things of that nature And Dave is actually going to go a little bit more in depth with those. Annual inspections are vital for all of these features. They should be performed by certified inspectors so they know what to look for and how to identify issues and help you address them correctly. They do inspect all the features and facilities on your site. So you may have a site that's really large. You might have permeable pavement and a wet basin and other features. So they would look at all of those and provide you with inspection form and report, and then also hopefully recommended maintenance for those features. Inspections and maintenance are always less expensive than if you're trying to do retroactive maintenance where you have a large issue. And I have some pictures on some upcoming slides and I'll give you an idea of what some larger scale issues might be versus just some small issues that can be taken care of in a day or, you know, within one or two site visits. These photos are some common maintenance issues that we see. So on the top right side, we have a curb cut inlet to a bioretention cell that has been overgrown with grass, and it's also clogged with sediment from the parking lot. And what we would do to correct that is pull out those rocks and restabilize the or regrade the inlet and then return the rock to its place. The bottom right corner is also a bioretention cell where the influx of water has pushed the mulch all the way out to the sides of the bioretention cell and exposed the soil media underneath. On the top left side, we have a wet basin that all the vegetation has died. It's likely that it was oversaturated and the vegetation there was not as water tolerant as they had hoped when it was originally installed. And on the bottom right or bottom left side, we have a forebay to a wet basin that has become overgrown with invasive cattail. So the entire forebay that leads all the way, this is actually the same basin as what you're seeing in the top left photo. So that entire forebay is full of cattail. And that's pretty common. Cattail and Phragmites are common issues with stormwater features. This next feature is something that we don't see very frequently, but we do have a client that has these structures on their site. They are in Sandusky near the lake. These are bubble up structures. So when it rains, the water actually comes up through that grate and into the surrounding area versus draining down through. And it should look like the photo on the bottom left where it's clear and free of debris. But some of the structures on site look like the top right-hand side where it is clogged with invasive vegetation. So that's Phragmites growing up through the water that's inside the grate. These are some photos of some more uncommon maintenance issues or large-scale maintenance issues. The top left-hand side is a photograph of a muskrat lodge within a wet stormwater basin. It was not there in May of the same year, but in November during the second inspection, we discovered the muskrat lodge. In normal ponds, they wouldn't be an issue, but since muskrats like to burrow into the slopes, it becomes an issue because you're losing the stability of your side slopes, which could increase the potential for sedimentation into the basin from the side. The bottom left side is an emergency overflow that should be all rock, but it has become overgrown with vegetation. So we would need to remove that vegetation and add some additional rock to the area to make sure that if the basin would overflow, it would drain properly out through the overflow, emergency overflow. And the bottom left photo is the same basin as seen in the top right. So this is looking from the inlet side of that basin. And the other maintenance problem that this basin has is the forebay has become clogged with sediment. And so really when it gets to that stage, your only option is to dredge it to remove that sediment. And this particular basin has some issues with access also, so it's made it difficult to get equipment and large machinery down there to complete the dredging. So we're working with them to get that completed. And then the bottom right side is more of an uncommon, it's not an expensive maintenance issue, but a little bit more uncommon. This is the bottom of a catch basin outlet structure in a bioretention cell. And sediment and rock has traveled from other parts of the site. So this site has 3 bioretention cells and started to clog the bottom of this catch basin. So in that case, you would just get an industrial or heavy duty vac and vac that out of the bottom. Okay.
Well, it seemed like the universe was against you.
Yes.
Through passing trains and
but
technical
we have
difficulties.
The technical difficulties figured out, and the train has went by.
So there's a quick question from one of our attendees, and
Sure.
The question is, do you want to encourage native wetland plants to grow in these basins?
Yes. So when we are working with clients on maintenance plans, we do encourage them to plant natives in the basins. We try to choose things that are water tolerant, and whether that's they need water all the time, so we're recommending that for the wet basin, or they need it most of the time for the drier basins.
All right.
That's definitely something we encourage.
We're going to transition over to our next presenter, but I'm going to ask another poll question while we're doing that about whether or not your local municipality uses green infrastructure practices. So I'll launch that right now. While we're waiting on that, I'll introduce Dave. Dave's a project developer with our Southern Ohio Davey Resource Group office in Cincinnati. And although Dave's only been with us for a year, he's put in over a 30-year career with the Cincinnati Park Board, and he's done a lot of work with the Greater Cincinnati Metropolitan Sewer District. He's a project developer for our ecological and environmental service lines in Southern Ohio. And I think we're about ready here. Let's see how the polling's going. Looks like most people are saying yes, they do use green infrastructure practices. If you guys want to, you can change or switch seats.
Oh, yeah.
That would probably make more sense.
Yeah, and then it looks like you'll have to close the poll. Yeah.
All right, it looks like we're ready to go, Dave.
Hello, everybody. I just want to try to pick up a little bit where Becca dropped off. She discussed the regulatory programs in place for stormwater management, and I'd like to remind you why those are so vitally important to us all. First of all, we want to prevent flooding. We want to prevent erosion. We want to protect fish and wildlife. We want to protect recreational uses of our waterways. And probably just as important, if not more important, is many of us get our drinking water from natural waterways. So I want to talk about bioretention. Bioretention is designed to infiltrate and slowly release stormwater. It reduces the volume of stormwater, but it also, just as importantly, increases the quality. So it has the ability to provide functions for infiltration, filtration, storage, evaporation, and transpiration. A properly functioning bioretention basin or swale should infiltrate at the rate of 1 to 4 inches per hour. What that does is it gives it time to remove pollutants, And it gets time for the system to be able to accept more water over a longer period of time if you are going back into a stormwater system or sewer system. One thing to be concerned about, over time, they do slow down the infiltration rate as they get filled with fines, clays, and silts, and compaction can cause a problem. So when you're doing maintenance on these basins, you need to be careful about your footprint. Doing things by hand and using manual equipment like wheelbarrows is much more practical than using mechanized equipment. So the other thing that's important to think about bioretention basins and swales is that it functions as part of the landscape and aesthetic value. So a properly maintained functioning bioinfiltration basin can be a very attractive part of the landscape around your building or in your park. It can also target pollutant removal by placing them in strategic places such as next to surface parking lots where you're getting runoff from automobiles and potentially salt. So again, we're trying to improve the appearance of our properties as well as control stormwater and cleaning it before we release it downstream. So this kind of shows the major components of a typical bioretention basin. This could be a swale, it could be a basin, it could be a small installation in a parking lot. So the idea is that water infiltrates through the bioretention soil into a gravel storage layer where it's held for a while so that it has time to infiltrate into the native soil. Typically, we do install an underdrain with an overflow inlet so that we can control the level of the water as it flows in and make sure that we don't increase flooding in areas where it's not intended. And generally, we use plants to improve the stormwater quality as the water moves through them. They tend to trap pollutants and hydrocarbons and pull it out of the water so that we're getting clean water back into our system. Mulch layer prevents weeds from growing up, and the plants provide habitat, aesthetics, and transpiration. And as you can see, the water comes in from the roadway and infiltrates down through the soil, and the overflow goes to a local sewer or to the environment if the capacity is there. So I'll show you a real life situation. This is the Kingsgate Conference Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we were approached by the property, the building manager. And the problem was that water is sitting in a low spot, and this is the front entrance to the building. Water runs off from the upper levels of the building. There's a parking garage on the side, and water that hits all of that flowed downstream, down the hill, and this entrance was the lowest point of the property. So we were also getting overland flow off the roadway, and this area was inundated with water. And in the wintertime, the drains that were there didn't have the capacity to accept all the water. It would get filled with sediment and mulch and leaves, and it would flood and then it would freeze, creating a safety problem for people trying to attend the conference center. So we suggested doing 2 bioinfiltration basins on either side of the plaza. These were the lowest points of the plaza, and we were able to use the existing stormwater inlets. So we incorporated them into the design and built these structures with a pretty minimal footprint, so we didn't impact the use of the plaza or the front entranceway. But we thought that we looked at it, and the size of them was enough capacity to manage the stormwater that was coming into this area. So back to a longitudinal profile. This is kind of the different layers that we'll be looking at as I go through the construction of these basins. So starting from the top, it's the elevation of the overflow. That's where the drain opening is. And then there is a soil media It's a bioinfiltration planting mix that's designed to infiltrate water, but also have enough organic component and fines in it to keep plants alive. There's always you have to do some testing. You can use an infiltrometer or you can do perk tests, but you always have to make sure that your mix is lean enough to move water through the system as it's designed, but you also don't want to have to go water really often. We know that because of the way the mix is designed, we will have to water during dry periods of time, and we try to use native plants to minimize that. But you try to reach a balance where you're getting the infiltration rates that you want, but you also are able to keep the plants alive. And below that, there's a layer of coarse sand on top of a layer of pea gravel. What this does is it filters out the fines so they don't get into the gravel storage layer. Historically, geotextile fabrics were used for this layer, but over time they tend to clog up and prevent infiltration. So it seems that the best way now for us to do this is using the coarse layer of sand with pea gravel below it, and then the gravel storage layer. And then below that is an under drain that's perforated on the bottom. This is in the gravel layer. And so water that doesn't drain out through the existing soil below this gets taken away by the under drain. Here's a look of the under drain after it's installed. This is perforated on the bottom. That's the blue pipe that you're looking at. And the black geotextile fabric is in place because in Cincinnati we have heavy clay soils with a lot of fines in them, and they tend to migrate upward into the gravel layer and can clog it up. So the goal here is to allow as much water that will pass through that clay layer as possible to go through, but also to help keep the fines from working back up into the biofiltration system and blocking the pores. So here's a look of the different layers. The number 57 gravel. We use that because we can calculate the storage volume between the angular gravel. It's generally pretty consistent no matter where you are. And then the next layer is the pea gravel. That is to keep some of the fines from going through. And then on top of that is the clean sand. So the pea gravel holds the sand in place and it prevents the fines from migrating through to the gravel layer, but the water can still pass freely through. This is what it looked like with the number 57s in place. The white pipe is the existing sewer line. So this one overflows into the sewer. This is regulated by the city of Cincinnati. There's stormwater regulations. We can't release it to another property. And actually this is the lowest point of this property, so we couldn't do that anyway. Some of these can be built in locations where the water can flow out to a natural waterway. That's optimal. But here we had to tie back into the existing sewer line. And we always put in a clean out. It's very important in case there is a clog over time, so that you can run a snake or a hose through here and wash it out and have access to it rather than having to dig everything up. So here we are, we're looking at the sand layer on top of the gravel, and we're starting to put in the bioinfiltration mix. That's the darker brown color material. And the freeboard on these, the amount of space between the planting bed, the mulch, and the inlet should be 12 inches. That is storage capacity for water to infiltrate in. And here's our final product. We used native plants. As much as possible, we matched the landscape plants that were used at the conference center. So these are a mixture of Shasta daisies, coneflowers, and panicum grass. The goal is to achieve 75% coverage of the area. And we prefer to use decorative gravel for mulch than double shredded hardwood. So a little bit about maintenance. as Becca mentioned, the most important thing is to get your eyes on this and to recognize early signs of problems. If you don't do that and you let it go over time, it can get clogged up with erosion, with leaves, with all kinds of litter, trash, and it stops working. And at some point, you may have to dig the whole thing up and start over again. So we want to prevent that by good housekeeping, prevention of problems. Inspect it regularly, keep track of it, keep track of what you do, and focus on preventive maintenance to avoid big expenses. So some things to look for: function, a clogged outlet or loss of mulch. Aesthetics such as dying plants can lead you to problems. For example, if the plants are dying in the lower parts of the basin, chances are good that the water isn't infiltrating as quickly as it should be. Also look for safety issues. Overgrown vegetation can cause the loss of line of sight if these are in the right of way. Low branches that people could walk into, blocking sidewalks or doorways. Most of the recommendation standards are to use double shredded hardwood mulch because it doesn't float as freely as single shredded or wood chips do. And a 3-inch layer does prevent weeds. It adds a little bit of organic material and conserves moisture in the dry weather. But as I stated before, we like to use gravel. We like to use angular decorative gravel because it tends to stay in place much better. It infiltrates, and we're not introducing organic matter to the system, which I think is a good thing over time. I think if you keep adding mulch each year, you're just adding more fines that at some point are going to slow down your infiltration rate and potentially clog it. So I prefer to use the gravel, and then just do soil tests periodically, once a year, once every other year, so that you can monitor the organic component of your soil and fertilize if you need to. And I would suggest a liquid fertilizer as opposed to granular. Some simple common sense things: don't put grass. When you cut your grass, blow the grass away, pick it up, use a bagger on your mower. We want to keep as much of the organic content out of this as possible. You can see the image on the lower left. What happens, grass clippings are in there and it's turning the water green, and it's you can see it in the basin there. Plants, the plantings are very important. They provide uptake of nutrients and water and stabilize the bed and make it attractive. We want these to be things that the public, that our users, that people visit our parks, that people visit our buildings see and appreciate. And while they might not understand all the functions that they're providing, as long as they look good aesthetically, I think that people will like it and accept it. So when you choose your plants, you want things that look good. You want to have a 4-season display horticulturally, but you also need to find plants that can tolerate temporary inundation, especially for the lower parts of the basin. If it's a gradual slope, you want to use natives or cultivars depending on what's available in your area and what works the best. We also recommend that you plant them in deliberate patterns and plant them in clusters so that people doing the maintenance can understand what they're supposed to keep and what they're not supposed to keep. That can be very difficult for some people who aren't specifically trained in this to identify the differences between cultivars, that are intentional, and invasive plants and weeds and things that aren't wanted there. Some more maintenance issues. Again, look at the plants and see if they're healthy, and also see if it's overgrown. We don't want the plants to block inlets or outlets. We don't want them to block surrounding sidewalks or curbs. We want people to have good sight lines. Replace dead plants as soon as possible. Sometimes you have to look at what's working and what's not working in your basin or in your area. Again, do a soil test if you're not sure if there's something going on and you've replaced the plants more than once. Do a soil test. Also, you want to look at it when it's wet and dry and see. Just stick your finger in there underneath the mulch and see what's going on. Hand pull weeds as much as possible. We don't recommend the use of herbicides because typically these are going into water and you need special training for that and special pesticides. Again, pruning, make sure that trash is picked up. Make sure that there's not plants in the basin shading out other ones that you want to keep. Watering, you want to water right after planting and during the first growing season, and after that during droughts. You don't want to water them too often, but at the same point, as I mentioned before, these are designed to dry out, so you should monitor it. It's a problem. This is a red twig dogwood, and you can see that it's undergone a little bit of probably frost upheaval. So you want to inspect these things fairly often to make sure that, you know, something like this, it's cheaper just to replant it than it is to have it dry out and die, and then you have to buy a new plant and plant it. So a lot of it is common sense and inspecting them. We also recommend that you keep good records. You should document everything, areas of erosion, dead plants. You should photo document as well. You should inspect the outlets and overflow as much as possible. Here's a problem. You can see that it's silted in and the water isn't perking. So this is a problem that would probably be somewhat expensive to fix. Most of the vegetation is gone in the area where the water's ponding. That's not what we want. We want it to be full of plants, 75%, and also you can see where it's eroding coming into it. It's bringing in silt and causing problems. So as I said before, water should flow at a rate of 1 to 4 inches per hour. If it's standing more than 24 hours after a rain event, that's a problem. You can do some core aeration sometimes and get it moving again. Typically that's a short-term solution, but you know, you can try that first. And if it's severely clogged, you may have to dig it out and redo it. Also make sure to check the under drain pipes. If it has an under drain, you know, check the clean out if it's flowing slowly. Maybe you just need to blow that out, put some water pressure on it or a snake and get it opened up again. You can also dig a test pit somewhere near the middle to see where it's clogging. That may help you figure out where the problem is. Also, when you have to do it, you need to dig out everything, remove the salt, mulch, move the plants, dig out the contaminated soil and start over again, which is what you're trying to prevent. Also need to check the inlets. Are they in good structural repair? We don't want them to be collapsed or blocked. Look to see where the sediment's coming in. If you do have problems with it, is it something you can stabilize outside the basin, outside the BMP to prevent it from coming in? You should also look at removing fine sediment, debris, and trash as it comes in and not let it build up. If you have problems continual, you can reestablish the grade. You can add vegetation or replace stone, riprap it, whatever, to try to keep the soil in place. This is known as a forebay. This was landscaped bioretention median. This is actually in Sweden. And I like the design of this. It traps all of the things that run in off the roadway. This is a median in the middle of a big highway. And so everything that falls in the road gets caught in this thing, and you know, cigarette butts and paper and trash. So it's a good clean way to keep it from getting into the system. And it's not always possible with bioinfiltration basins. The swales are a little more easy with, especially when you're using curb cuts off a parking lot or off a roadway like this. Again, maintenance, we have to look at the area surrounding it as much as we do the BMP, the basin. Make sure that trash and debris is picked up. Make sure that sediment isn't accumulating on the surface of it. If it's crusty or caked over, water doesn't infiltrate through it as quickly as it should be. Also beware of compaction, and make sure there's no sinkholes or animal burrows, things that are going to undermine the system. The slopes that lead to it should be covered with vegetation or stabilized with stone or gravel, and make sure that they are intact as well. Also, Dog poop. That's a
No other way to
problem.
say it, Dave.
It's nutrient loading, and we don't want that. I mean, obviously, aesthetically, we don't want to look at it, and we don't want to smell when we're walking by, but that should be picked up, as well as the leaves. We should always try to keep them free of leaves and seed heads. And the other thing that we look for is, are there overhanging trees nearby that can be limbed up, pruned back a little bit to try to reduce the amount of leaf load that falls on it. The water going through it should come out clean. If it comes out looking dirty, then there's a problem. Probably a leak somewhere, or it's bypassing the infiltration layers around the edge. So the water coming out of these should be pretty clean. We also have to look at where the water's coming in. This inlet, you can see it's all silted in. Probably applications of sand and gravel over time on the roadway for controlling snow. Could be just dead plants along the edge where over time from people either driving on it or misapplication of chemicals. But this whole thing needs to be cleaned out. The sediment needs to be removed, and it needs to be replanted and stabilized. So again, some basic things. Don't dump grass clippings, leaves, soil, or trash into the areas. Keep them picked up as much as possible. Add mulch or vegetate bare soils. Don't over fertilize nearby lawn areas. We don't want to get nutrients going into this thing. Dispose of pet waste properly. Keep the area around it as clean as possible. Protect it from salt and de-icing agents. Water's going to sit in this for a while, and we don't want to kill the plants in the wintertime. Don't plow snow into it. Plant native trees, shrubs, and perennials to assist stormwater retention, and periodically test the infiltration rate. And that's what I have for you today. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Well, we're looking like we're gonna wrap things up here right on time. So I wanted to ask one last poll question. It was a fun fact that Dave gave me, so that'd be fun to try, something a little different. So I'll ask that poll question real quick, and then we'll do a couple other things while we're doing that, and then we'll wrap things up. Okay. And while we're getting some answers on that question, can we go back to the opening slide?
Sure.
You had to stop on that one, didn't you?
I'm sorry. It's,
Just slow.
yeah,
Okay.
there's a little bit of a lag.
So I'm getting some information here that people are really interested in the Swedish example. How'd you come across that? Can you elaborate a bit more on that design or its functionality? Just the cover slide. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I am working on a research project with a group of PhDs from Malmo, Sweden. The Swedish federal government is paying for a study to see how green infrastructure can be used to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the idea is that cities want to apply green infrastructure, whether it's stormwater management, BMPs, whether it's reforestation, it's parks and green spaces, green roofs. How do they get credit for recognition for the improvements that they're making in the environmental quality and actually working towards meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? There's no way to track that. There's no way to measure that. So the research project, at least the first part of it, the pilot, was 3 cities, comparative cities from different cultures, different parts of the world. So the 3 initial studies were Cincinnati, Ohio, where I was one of 2 people who were the main point people for that study, and I focused on the parks, the street trees, and the green infrastructure BMPs, mostly stormwater related. And then the other one was Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. They have some of their own challenges, mostly dealing with stormwater, water quality. Theirs is a little more serious than ours. They're worried about drinking water quality and sewer treatment issues, but they also have green infrastructure, BMPs and street trees and other things. And then the third one is Malmo, Sweden. So I was actually able to go to Malmo in the fall, and they're doing some amazing things with green roofs and stormwater management. And the goal of this project is to extend it out to 10 more cities that would include Asia, another study site in Africa, Australia, and more of Europe. So I'm actually participating in the second round of grant writing for that part of it. And if you're interested in learning more, I will be speaking at the National Stormwater Symposium on that research project in Cincinnati in March, and at the Ohio Stormwater Conference in Sandusky a little later in the year.
All right, great. I'm seeing there's a question for Becca.
Okay.
Certified inspector, that term, like, how does one become a certified inspector?
There are a couple different organizations that certify individuals. The two certifications that revolve around the actual inspections themselves are the Certified Erosion and Sediment Stormwater Inspector, so that's SESHWI, and then CPESC, which is, I have to remember all of the Certified Professional in Erosion and Sediment Control.
Yeah.
So those two certifications revolve around inspections themselves, and there's a few other MS4 related and other stormwater management related certifications. I went through EnviroCert, and they offer a course where you get like manual and you go through and learn about the history of stormwater regulation and learn about all the construction best management practices. But there are a few other organizations that offer those inspections. Locally in Ohio, in Northeast Ohio in particular, there's also an inspection and maintenance certification that's a good ground level inspection course that kind of gives you a good overview of these BMPs and their inspection and maintenance. But most people start, and there are some cities and counties that require the person doing your inspection to be SESHWI or CPESC. So.
All right, very good. We are running out of time here, so if anyone has any further questions, we put things back to the cover slide just so you had my information. You can reach out to me. If you have any information, we're going to put this on our company website, davey.com, but if you need anything else, please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the webinar or any of our other services that we provide. The answer to the last polling question was 9%. Most people guessed 5%, but it was 9%. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I want to thank our presenters, Dave and Becca. I had a lot of fun with this one. And thank you to our audience, and we hope to see you next time. Take care.